Hey, Idral, I had some stuff come up in a recent training session. I wanted to talk with you about schedule priorities. Now, as training manager, I see some of the same things that you do as a customer success manager, but we have different purposes. So I kind of wanted to have a conversation about schedule priority and some of the things that we've both run into and some things we could pass on to our customers or users. So what's important to you about schedule priority or what how do you want to kind of start our conversation about this?
Oh, okay. So there's a lot there, but the first thing is to understand how powerful our schedule priorities are.
Yeah, yeah.
They can do a lot for you, but if you're not careful, they can do a lot to you. So you have to be careful. And it's great to get a better understanding of how our priorities work, and I think that'll help a lot of folks to once we kind of iron this out for them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that it can do a lot, but if, probably with anything that's powerful, you can create some unexpected consequences, and we want to. I think that was our goal with this conversation was. So, what can schedule priorities be used for? How would you start with that?
Well, all right. So from my role now as a customer success manager, I deal a lot with people who are um, doing extreme programming. We'll call it. It's very
Hmm.
extensive use of devices, starting, stopping, pausing, and stuff. So one of the tools we use is to use priorities and schedules. So one we did this year is with a project up in Minnesota, where they have to use the same main line to fill their irrigation lake as they use for the irrigation. So the irrigation refill pump can't run at the same time an irrigation pump or program is running. So we put that in a specific program priority to make sure it always gets preempted by irrigation. So a pretty simple approach,
Okay.
uh, but it works really well. Others are we often use them other times when we're trying to fill cisterns, and we're using pumps or wells to fill cisterns, and we build in some priorities there to make sure that we don't completely empty a water source because maybe city water is more expensive, harder
Mhm.
to get. Maybe it's reclaimed water. There's all sorts of different reasons, but we can utilize priorities with our fills to make sure we're getting proper filling that way.
So then at a high level, you can, with the concept of the schedule priority is you could make a program or a schedule run in a different order, I guess, without changing the start time.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So
So,
there are things we can do. Yes.
okay. So do you have an example or two of specific examples when you've used schedule priorities? You kind of gave me a higher level, but let's dive a little deeper on when somebody might use
Sure.
them.
Sure. Okay. So my favorite one is kind of a joke, but you've got all your schedules set up, but you've had flowers in front of the president's house at the university, and you don't want to get the president's wife wet. So you want to make sure that particular, that's a bad thing. You want to run that zone at a very specific and particular time to make sure that she doesn't get wet. So we'll give it a priority, and it'll let it run because it's small. It's a small area, and then it'll still let everything else run through its natural progression and timing without jacking up the whole system and running out of time in a day.
Okay. And then what about something more sophisticated, something like a pump or a cistern or something like that?
Well, something a little more. I'm gonna go back to it's up in Minnesota again, Lakeville. We use a level transducer. We've got a level transducer that is tied to one of our pressure transducers
Hmm.
in their cistern. So we're measuring exactly the same levels that their Watertronics pump stations water measuring at. So we're watering from the depth based on the transducer, and it's telling the whoops the pump when to start. So the pump is also uh, related to an event bicoder. So if the lake that the pump is pulling from doesn't have enough water, we can turn off the pump, or we can keep that pump from running based on pressure, the level, and priorities. Their schedule is set at a priority 6, and all their irrigations are set at 5. So that there's almost no way possible. Plus, there's a water window. So we've made it impossible, knock on wood, that it could ever run at the same time, because you can't run our Watertronic station up against their recharge pump. That's a really bad deal.
So that comes back to that changing the order in which things run, regardless of time, because this pump isn't going to turn on based on time. It's going to turn on a different start condition, and this is a water level or pressure. Oh, so you can't schedule that. It just happens when it happens, and you didn't make sure that these two don't overlap, and a schedule priority gets it. I like that.
Right.
That's awesome.
Exactly.
Okay, so yeah, I had some. So it sounds like using schedule priorities is a great thing, but I've run into situations where people use them and they shouldn't. So could you tell us when people should not use schedule priorities, or what they shouldn't be used for?
Well, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but I've seen people actually set up their schedules. They start them at a low number, and they put them in the order they want them to go, but then they put a priority of what level they want them to go as well. And what they don't realize is every time there's a priority that's at least one less than a schedule, that schedule will run. So 7 schedules, priorities 1 through 7, one's going to run first until it's finished, even though they all have the same start time. Then 2 will run, then 3, and pretty soon it'll be your system that's supposed to be smart won't ever finish because it's doing exactly what you told it to do. You're going to get very angry at it.
So yeah, so I've seen very similar to what you're saying. I've seen people that have had schedule the 5th schedule and make it priority 5, and the 6th schedule make it priority 6, and the 7th all the way down, and it just adds a layer of complexity that many people don't need because they didn't have a specific design intent for it. Where the other examples you use, that was a very specific purpose, and they used it for that one. So just adding it in for giggles is probably not a good reason to use it.
We preset everything at a 2 from the factory. That's our factory default. I ask people to use, I call it an Idralism, sadly, but I tell them to use 5. Because if I use 5, I still have 1 through 4 for that flower bed at the president's house, or the new sod. I had to put in new sod in there, and it's kind of almost like a nursery state. It needs to water certain times of the day. I need it to water, and I need to stop everything else because I got to get my sod to live. So that gives me the option, some room, if you will, to give certain schedules a priority and not affect the rest of everything else running.
So rather than set them at the default 2, you're setting them down at 5, and then you have this opportunity to insert. You got 4 spaces above it that you could insert something in and have it run into the priority. That's a great idea. Right. I think we're going to trademark the Idralism. I like this on the when it comes to the system.
I've even seen a guy who sets all of his at 11. He doesn't use very many higher priorities, but he's already gone to 11 because he's like, man, I don't want to ever not have the option to put priorities in.
Sure.
So that's his choice.
So now what would happen if I set all of my programs to priority 5? So I have 20 programs, they're all set to priority 5. Is that good? Is that bad?
To me, that's good. If they're all 5s and you've got the system set to manage by flow, you've got all of your learn flows, everything set up the way it should be, that should allow your controller to maximize your run times by shortening them and allow you to get everything watered in an efficient amount of time. And if you even add in, make sure you're using soak cycles, whether you have a moisture sensor or not, that will just continue to shrink your run times so that you get everything watered in the defined amount of time you have at night. It's very efficient. It all adds to the efficiency of the system.
Let me make sure I understand this correctly, actually, is if I have Schedule 4 and Schedule 5 set at the same priority, and there is a conflict, whether it's a soil moisture sensor or whatever else that made them conflict, they would run Program 4 and then Program 5, correct?
Yeah, that's what I call the organic scheduling or priorities of our system, is it'll always take the lowest number schedule first and then read the gallons, the number of zones it's allowed to run, everything that goes into our formulation.
Yeah.
And then it may actually pick up 5 because, like you said, 5 moisture sensors. Hey, you know what? I do need to run today. let's run. And so it allow, if it's got the water, if it's got the number of zones allowed electrically and hydraulically, 4 and 5 could in fact run together,
Yeah.
just because that's the natural order of things.
Right. And I think that natural order, that stacking concept is pretty common in the industry. And it's going to be an expected behavior where the schedule priority can change that. It'll do what you told it to, but your expected behavior is going to be maybe not what you expected. So this is about having an idea of what's going to happen. What are the consequences of your programming?
Yeah. So if you've got a lot of stuff going on, moisture sensors, event switches, things like that going on, that's a real good reason. Another good reason why you want to keep it all the same priority.
Yeah.
But just change the order of the schedule, the numbering. That's why again, in Idralism, I always ask people to start at schedule 10 because it's going to be my lowest number schedule. But then that leaves me 1 through 9. Let's say I do need that flower bed again. I can now make that schedule 2 or 3 or 1 or whatever, and it will, by just natural order of the natural progression, it's going to run first. If I have 5 programs set to run at the same time, it's going to go to 1 first, make sure it gets its water at 10 p.m. And then it's going to run everything. Everything else is just going to kind of fall into place.
Yeah.
Based on all those scheduling. So
good. And that's something we talked about in an earlier conversation. So if you wanted to if people listening want to dig down a little bit deeper, they could watch that previous video where we talked about scheduling best management practices, and ordering is one of those things where the idea of starting at 10 and giving you opportunity. So you mentioned the color pink. So let's just remind people what that color coding pink means, either on quick view or in maps. What is that?
So pink is simply just paused. So when you see pink, it's paused. It's time to take a look at some other issues you might have.
So it could be a pause condition from a coach's button or from some other sensor, or it could be a schedule that the one priority is superseded another and has caused the lower priority program to pause.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Exactly.
I think that's a great summary of about schedule priority. So hopefully we answered a couple of questions for folks, and thanks for your help, Idral. Appreciate it.